is an external expert in the Board of Studies in a number of universities like SKBU, Vidyasagar University, Mumbai University, etc. She is the member of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell in Bankura University. She has been appointed adjunctor for PhD thesis by Baroda University, Assam University, Budon University, Rabindra Bharati University, Vidyasagar University, Bankura University, NIT Durgapur, Zadavpur University, etc. She has been awarded the Noble Asian Educational Leader Award for 2020. Uh, and such a big personality is available for all of you students. I heard many times to Aparajita ma'am, means as she has a fixed, watermark on the brains of everyone whoever listened her. So I must tell you that you will not forget it throughout of life, and everyone will want to listen her again and again, as the same passion I would have, ma'am, the same burning passion in my students, and they are eagerly waiting for you since from 6 days. So
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Those were very, very kind words, and I don't know how much I deserve those words,
that
deserve
is
that
really
amount
thank you.
of praise, and it's very
Actually,
difficult. It becomes daunting to
yeah.
those levels of expectation. So I hope I do that, and I hope the my lecture goes down well with the students. I'll try to be as simple as possible because since most of the audience is students, so I'll try to use as little jargon as possible, and I'll try to be as lucid as possible, and let's hope for the best. Let's see how the lecture goes down. Well, today I have a PowerPoint that I want to share with you. So can I
Yes.
do that right now?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. You can. Yes, you can.
Yes, just give me a moment to get the PowerPoint on screen. Here you are. Is the PowerPoint visible to everybody?
It's starting, ma'am. Yeah, it's starting. Wait, wait.
It'll take a little time, so
Yes,
it'll
yes,
come
yes.
up. Is it there now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, right.
Yes.
And am I perfectly audible?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
That's great. So we are good. Okay, so we are good to start. So today I'm going to talk about feminism. Now, feminism is a term that is kind of like, I always love to call it a very tricky term because this is a term that has been interpreted in numerous ways by numerous people during numerous times. And when times have changed, the interpretations of the theories of feminism, or feminism as an ideology, or feminism as an idea, the the interpretations have changed as well. So we will try, there have been paradigm shifts all the time, so we will try to find out what feminism is all about, and since this is mostly for students, we need to understand what feminism is, what radical feminism is, what liberal feminism is, where feminism is standing today, and more importantly, what is it that creates that position for women that necessitates the ideas about feminism, or webinars like this, where we talk about feminism. Why do we need to talk about feminism in the first place? So that needs to be understood. So let me start at the beginning. Like I said just now, that feminism is a very tricky term. Why is that? Because sometimes it's overrated, sometimes it's underrated. Sometimes people say, oh, feminism is the joke of the year because feminists are, people, women who go absolutely fanatic about certain issues, and some people, gather an idea that maybe feminists are man haters. So there are loads of misinterpretations of feminism as well. So that's why I say that this is sometimes overrated, sometimes underrated, often misunderstood term, and often, like I said, that people make a joke out of feminism sometimes. So it's sometimes very vilified. It's a term that's a tricky term. Now, women like Virginia Woolf also was not very happy with the term feminism. And when you really talk about that, even Simone de Beauvoir uh, didn't call herself a feminist until the later half of her career. So feminism is something that people are very wary to use as a term. Now, Margaret Walters, in her book called Feminism, this is a very seminal book, and since there are lots of students over here, I would ask you to gather even if you can get hold of the soft copy of this book, it would be wonderful. So it's a book called Feminism, a very short introduction. This traces the history of opposition to the term feminism, which takes up an entire first chapter. The entire first chapter is devoted to understanding the opposition to the term feminism. So that is how much feminism has had to fight against. Now, this is one lady whose book I really admire, Chris Whedon. She wrote a book called Feminist Practice and Post-Structuralist Theory. This came out in 1987. And Chris Whedon talks in very lucid terms about feminism. And why I like Chris Whedon's book is because Chris Whedon gives a spatio-temporal situation of feminism as a theory. So the very first lines of very first chapter, the book begins with the lines which I have quoted over here. The chapter is titled Feminism and Politics. There she says, feminism is a politics. It is a politics directed at changing existing power relations between women and men in society. These power relations structure all areas of life, the family, education, and welfare, the worlds of work and politics, culture, and leisure. They determine who does what and for whom, what we are and what we might become. Now, there are some terms in this definition that I would like to concentrate on that, and that is why I have highlighted those in green for you. So one important term is feminism is a politics. Need to store that in our hard disk. So it is a politics directed at what? Changing existing power relations. So feminism then seems to have a direct connection with power relations, and wherever we talk about power relations, we remember people like Michel Foucault, Bentham. So changing existing power relations between women and men in society, these power relations structure all areas of life. That is what makes it so difficult, because you never know where to begin with feminism and where to end, because it's structured in all aspects of life. The family, education, welfare, works of politics and worlds of work and politics, culture, leisure, they determine who does what. That is, what will women do, what will men do, and for whom. Whom are we working for? Are we working for ourselves, or are we working for the men, or are we working for the women? So that is also there as encompassed inside the definition of feminism. What we are, and more importantly, what we might become. So what we are at this point of time, and what we might become if we discuss about feminism more than ever. That's why seminars like this are more important. Now, then, the main takeaway points from this definition that I just gave you are: A, reaction or resistance to patriarchy. I will come to what patriarchy means a little later. So reaction and resistance to patriarchy. Ubiquity, meaning it engages almost all aspects of life. That is, it's there everywhere. So which also makes it very difficult to understand where to begin from. There is a power structure involved over here. It is a politics. It's a changing existing power relations. It has the power to change existing power relations and change it for the better, hopefully. All areas of life are encompassed: the family, education, welfare, and other aspects. And it also influences what we might become. So these are the very important things that come out of this definition that Chris Whedon has given us in her book. Now, this omnipresence of patriarchy is what makes it very difficult to figure out where to begin the resistance to patriarchy. If patriarchy is everywhere, you do not know where to start. The start, finding out or figuring out or putting your finger on the starting point becomes a very difficult thing. Because if we really take a look at your the milieu that you're living in, you will find that patriarchy exists in family, it exists in your workplace, it exists in the legal system, it exists in the, it's everywhere. So you do not know where to begin. So that is what makes it very difficult to understand where feminism begins or should begin for that matter. So where did it all begin and when? Now, when you take a look at the Oxford English Dictionary, it gives a clue about where it began and how it began. So a spatio-temporal coordinate comes up when you take that as a definition. And what is the definition? Again, highlighting the main points out there. The issue of rights for women first became prominent during the French and American revolutions in the late 18th century, which means French Revolution came up about 1789 when the Bastille was stormed. In Britain, it was not until the emergence of the suffragette movement in the late 19th century that there was a significant political change. A second wave of feminism arose in 1960s. We talk about people like Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan, and these were the women who started the second wave of feminism. I'll come to the waves of feminism by the by. So 1960s were the time when the second wave of feminism arose, with an emphasis on unity and sisterhood this time. Seminal figures included Betty Friedan and Germaine Greer, like I was saying a little earlier. A third wave of feminism was identified in the late 1980s and 1990s as a reaction against the perceived lack of focus on class and race issues. This is when we started talking about Black women, we started talking about the different Asian women, so the different classes and races came into discussion, which was not there in the earlier phases. So what are the main points then? Advocacy of equality of sexes. The two sexes, the male and the female, that we are born as, those are to be equal. That is what is being advocated. Equal political rights, equal social rights, equal economic rights. All these things then began during two seminal incidents in history. One was the French Revolution and the other was the American Revolution. Now, the traits of feminism that we notice when we take feminism as an ism, as an ology, we find that it is a post-enlightenment. When was the enlightenment? It was during the 16th century. It began towards the end of the 16th century. Mostly it was there during the 17th century and the 18th century, when people like Rene Descartes came in, people like Kant came in, people like, Newton came in. So every aspect of life was being tempered or analyzed through the faculty of reason. People were becoming more reasonable. So Descartes said, I cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So what he meant to say is that my rational faculty, the faculty of thought process that I have inside my mind, the more I use that, the more I become a human being who exists. The more my existence becomes feasible or viable. So the more people started thinking, the enlightenment of knowledge came up, and what dissipated, what went away was what, is normally known as sapere aude. Sapere aude means daring to know. When daring to know came in, what is known as, Kant called it the Unmündigkeit. Unmündigkeit means your immaturity. That went away. So enlightenment brought in the thought process of rationality. So feminism came as a fallout of the thought process. That's why we call it post-enlightenment. It is Occidental sentiment. It means that very Oriental centric. Mostly the women of Europe and America are discussed when we discuss feminism as a theory, But in our country also, we did have people like Savitribai Phule or Tarabai Shinde or Pandita Ramabai or Begum Rokeya, all these people do not really feature in the ideology of feminism when we talk about it. It is only if we Indians propagate it, then we talk about it. But in the Western part of the world, people almost don't know about these women. But these women did a lot of work about feminism. So that's why I say that this is white woman centric. It's more white woman centric. Now, from the late 18th century right up to the 1980s or the 1990s, it went up as a movement. And now we also talk about the post-feminism and the post-feminism era. Now, after that, the more race and class conscious feminism came into being. Now, when we talk about feminism as a resistance to patriarchy, the first thought that comes to our mind is, what on earth is patriarchy? What exactly is patriarchy? What does it mean? Where is it found? Again, coming back to Chris Whedon, I told you that I really I admire the way the woman, writes, Chris Whedon. So I keep coming back to Chris Whedon again and again when I talk about feminism. So Chris Whedon again talks about the power relations in which women's interests are subordinated to the interests of men. So that is what she describes patriarchy as, that patriarchy is a kind of system or a structure where power relations in which women's interests are subordinated to the interests of men. These power relations take many forms, from the sexual division of labor and the social organization of procreation. When Simone de Beauvoir, she talked about the obscurity of the womb. Sometimes, we are glorified as mothers. Even I am a mother and I love my child very much. But being glorified as only a mother, according to Simone de Beauvoir and people like Chris Whedon, that takes away from your individual existence, that kind of like limits your existence into the framework of motherhood. So that is also people talk about and talk against sometimes. Sexual division of labor and the social organization of procreation to the internalized norms of femininity. Internalized norms of femininity. The norms of femininity. Again, normativity is something very difficult to understand. So whatever society we try to behave like that. When society tells us that when normal women, they should be quiet, they should be this, they should be that, we try to conform to that rubric of normativity. That is something that patriarchy dictates. Coming back to the definition, patriarchal power rests on the social meanings given to biological sexual difference. So this is something that people like, Judith Butler have also talked about, that when we are born with a biological sexual difference. We are not born with gender. Gender is something that society creates for us, and we begin to perform that role of gender. That's why, we talk about performativity, gender performativity. So in a patriarchal discourse, the nature and social role of women are defined in relation to a norm which sadly is very male. So this is what Chris Whedon has to talk about when she talks about patriarchy. Whedon further says that this finds its clearest expression in the generic use of the term man and he to encompass of all humankind. What do we say? Do we ever say woman is mortal? We always say man is mortal. Man should be honest, as if the feminine part of the world doesn't exist at all. So the fact that the generic term to encompass all humankind is named as man itself talks about patriarchy. So that is what Chris Whedon points out. Now, a quick coup d'etat of the history of feminism. The book 5 of Plato's Republic discusses the role of women, and Plato says that if dogs, are not, he says, are dogs divided into he's and she's, or do they both share equally in hunting and keeping watch and other duties of dogs? Or do we entrust to the males the entire and exclusive care of the flocks, and while we leave the females at home, under the idea that the bearing and suckling their puppies is labor enough for them? So he says that if dogs can be equal enough, in upbringing their children, the male dog as well as the female dog, it's not like the female dog should stay at home and the male dog should go and hunt. So they do it equally. So why can't human beings do it if dogs can do it? But yeah, before I go into Aristotle, Simone de Beauvoir points out that the first time we see a woman take up her pen in defense of her sex, was when Christine de Pizan wrote the Épître aux d'Amour, which, if you translate it to English, it becomes Epistle to the God of Love, and the Book of the City of Ladies, right at the turn of the 15th century. That was pretty early. And Catherine of Aragon also, she was the first official female ambassador, and she was Henry VIII's wife. So she also advocated the education for women. And Roger Ascham, he educated, he was a tutor to Elizabeth I, who studied Latin and Greek. And she also wrote little pieces like On Monsieur's Departure. So there was women's education at the point of time making its foray into the world. And Queen Elizabeth was described as having talent without a woman's weakness, industry with a man's perseverance, and the body of a weak and feeble woman, but with the heart and stomach of a king. Now, if you really take a look at this, you'll find that this was said in praise of Queen Elizabeth. Just give me a second. Amit, I'm in the middle of a webinar, so I'll talk later. So Queen Elizabeth, she was praised as saying that she was without a woman's weakness. But if you take a look at it from the other side, it then suggests that a woman is normally weak. When she's praised as saying, saying that she has a man's perseverance, people are then automatically does not have perseverance. So the fact that Queen Elizabeth had perseverance means that she was like a man. So man is supposed to be the one with strength, the one with perseverance, and the heart and stomach of a king. A woman named Margarita, living during the Renaissance, learned to read and write at the age of about 30. But she learned to read and write because she wanted no mediators to come between herself and her husband. So though she did defy gender roles, she became literate not to become a more enlightened person, but because she wanted to be a better wife by gaining the ability to communicate with her husband directly. But all the same, she was educated. The 17th century saw the development of the nonconformist sects like the Quakers, who talked about equality for everybody, including equality for women. So that was there. Among the Arab women also during the 18th century, a lot of equality was coming in, like female infanticide was talked against. The dowry was normally kept as the gift for the wife. Under Islamic law, marriage was no longer viewed as a status, but rather a contract, and women were given inheritance rights too. Now, these are very quickly, these are the tenets of the first wave of feminism. When did it happen? The 19th century and the early 20th century. Where did it happen? Mainly in the UK and the US. Focus was on the promotion of equal rights in marriage, parenting, property rights for women, gaining political power, particularly the rights of women's voting, women's sexual, reproductive, economic rights. And what was the fallout? What was the effect of this movement? Women's suffrage started in Britain's Australasian colonies at the end of the 19th century. The self-governing colonies of New Zealand granted women the right to vote. Australia granted female suffrage in 1902. In 1918, the Representation of the People's Act was passed. In 1928, this was extended to all women over 21. Before that, it was only for women above 30 and who owned houses. But now it was extended to all women over 21. Who were the main people in this group? I'm going through this very quickly because I want to come into how the paradigm shift needs to come in. When did it happen? Mid 20th century, and where some European countries like Switzerland, France, and who were the ones? Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan. We already talked about them. The focus was again on the suffragette movement, the reform of family laws to abolish marital exemption in rape laws, marital rape, something that was beginning to be talked about at that point of time. Issues of equality other than suffrage, and trying to end the gender-based discrimination everywhere. And this is the time when Carol Hanisch came up with her People were given the right to vote by the Women's Suffrage Referendum of 1984. Third wave feminism was late 20th and early 21st centuries, mostly the USA. Sexuality as a means of female empowerment. We talked about terms like zubisa. We talked about changing essentialist definitions of femininity, and the micropolitics of feminism, concerning only white women, that was getting changed. Race-related subjectivities were starting to be talked about. Difference feminism, which talks about, there is an inherent debate about the difference of the sexes, which some people believe that there are important differences between the sexes, versus those people who believe that there are no inherent differences between the sexes and contend that gender roles are due to social conditioning. Simone de Beauvoir, Judith Butler, all these people fall into this group that believe that women are basically as equal as men are, but society makes a difference. Global issues like rape, incest, and prostitution. Glass ceiling practices, women in their workplaces, talks about sexual harassment, and talks about why glass ceilings exist. I don't know whether you students know what a glass ceiling is, but a glass ceiling means when women can see how high she can climb up the corporate ladder or up the academic ladder in her workplace, but somehow something which is like glass, which she can see through it, she can see the sky, but she can't get up. So there are issues that are preventing her from climbing up to the height that she is capable of climbing up to. So those began to be talked about. Now, a few ladies who played very seminal roles in the study of feminism were Mary Wollstonecraft, writing the Vindication of the Rights of Women, Virginia Woolf, Simone de Beauvoir, Betty Friedan. Now, even earlier than that, much, much earlier, in 1589, this is a photograph of a woman called Jane Anger, a full-fledged polemic. Polemic is a kind of pamphlet that comes out on a single topic, discussing the rights of women and elevating them. So this is a picture of Jane Anger, and her dates are 1560 to 1600, which means it was even before the Enlightenment began. So she wrote a polemic called Protection for Women, which came out in 1589. There she propounded a very peculiar argument. She said that women are better than men because everybody says that Eve is born out of the ribs of Adam, so she takes that as an argument, and she says that the Bible says that man is made out of dust. Dust thou art, and to dust returnest. So man is made out of dust. So she says that if Adam is made out of dust, then Eve is better, because Eve is made out of the ribs and the flesh of Adam. So right from the beginning, she is made out of flesh and bones, whereas Adam is made out of only dust. So men are inferior to women. That is what she tries to say. But texts like this were still drawing the images from the Bible, because that is because, before the Enlightenment came up, it was basically a theocentric age. People believed in God, and people believed that all socio-political aspects were actually, a fallout of the main prima mobile, which was being moved by the gods in heaven. So that is what they believed, and that's why it was a theocentric age, and everything was thought of, or everything was explained in a very theocentric way. Jesus Christ, or because Mary Magdalene repented her sins to Jesus for reasons like that. But once the Enlightenment came in, divinity gave way to rationality. Like I said, that people like Rene Descartes, people like Kant, Locke, they were talking about rationality. So there was a paradigm shift right over there. The American Revolution, which happened from 1765 to 1783, and the French Revolution, which began with the storming of the Bastille in 1789 and went on up to 1790, just before the Reign of Terror, for 3 years. So these were two seminal revolutions that happened at that point of time, as a kind of fallout of the Enlightenment. Now, two very important documents that came out as a fallout of these revolutions were the United States Declaration of Independence, July 4, 1776, and the Declarations of the Right of Man and the Citizen, which came out in 1789 in France. Now, these subverted the earlier rubric of divinely ordained thought of a modality of equality for everybody. So these two documents brought out man's place in society based on rational thought processes. This is a little excerpt from the Declaration of Independence to show how equality for everybody was being propagated. I quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with life, liberty, and remember what Chris Whedon said? We use women. Why aren't they brought into the discussion? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with liberty and what Whedon says, that patriarchy finds the clearest expression in the general use of the terms man and he. So self-evident are the facts that exercise of rationality and common sense was something that was being propagated, not by any divine intervention, but it was equality for everybody in a society that was going towards democracy, little by little. This is where Mary Wollstonecraft steps in. She has some things to talk about over here. She says that if we are talking about equality everywhere, then women on the same platform of rationality and human rights as men should be there as well. If we are talking about equal rights for all men, then by the same logic, all women should have equal rights as well, because they are also human beings. If rationality is to be taken into purview, then women have to be given equal rights as well. This is what ushered in the most modern discourse of femininity. Now, in the Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792, she says, women are human beings. Another thing that she points out is, if they are human beings, and if human beings are supposed to be rational, then a woman is also as rational as a man is. Therefore, as much claimant to the rights mentioned in the Declaration as men are, then if men as per the Declaration of Rights, if men are privileged to have all the rights that come in life, then women should also be privileged enough to have those same rights equally. Calling women irrational then, or rather unrational, would be therefore subversion of the very common sense that men supposedly stand for. So what she's trying to do is she's trying to make a self-defeating argument out of this. She says, if you are saying that all men are rational, then you have to understand that all women are also rational. If you refuse to believe that women are also rational by that rationality or that logic, then you yourself are becoming irrational. So if you are to go by rationality, then you are to believe that women are also rational. And if women are also rational, they are as capable as men are, so they should have the equal rights that men uh, are supposed to have according to the Declaration of Rights. If women sometimes appear to be rather irrational or ignorant or slack, that is because the lack of education that is given to men. Women, even today in some parts of India, you will find that if there is a son and a daughter in a family, which is more so if it happens to be a family that is poverty stricken, then the boy will have the privileges but the girl will not. So it is still there, prevalent. The disdain with which the exercise of rationality in women is looked upon is unfeminine. If a woman tries to talk too rationally in a man's world, then she will be considered to be kind of like unfeminine. Women are supposed to be more emotional, they're supposed to be more sensitive, they're supposed to be more but they are not supposed to be very rational and very smart. More society begins to disregard them, not because of any inherent lack of rationality. So if sometimes women do appear to be not so rational as men, then you have to understand that that's because of her lack of education or lack of opportunity to become equally educated as men are, not because of some inherent lack of rationality that she is born with. Now, Mary Wollstonecraft, in her Vindication of the Rights of Women, she talks about women to be taken as rational objects and the right to education. And she also says that this would need an overhauling of the idiosyncrasy of the entire society, because the society in general, including both men as well as women, were educated in a great degree by the opinions and matters of society. She says that the entirety of society needs to be educated. You can